What happened? Is this crazy? We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in the history of Make America Great Again. How can you be against it?
Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm your host, Libby Casey, and I'm with senior political correspondent Rhonda Colvin and columnist and editorial writer James Hohmann. So today, Thursday, February 6th, is Decision Day for millions of federal workers who received Elon Musk's email offering or promising or threatening a fork in the road. It offers the chance to stop working but still get paid through September. But there are a lot of questions about the legality, the legitimacy of what might be a buyout offer, and whether it's really real. So on today's show, what the efforts of President Donald Trump and Elon Musk mean for federal workers. That's 2.3 million people spread out all over the country. Also the future of government contractors, of which there are millions, and changes to the functions of government that could affect you, whether you're a federal worker, whether you even live in America, or you're someone listening abroad. So let's talk about the fork in the road email, James. It had an Elon Musk vibe to it.
When he took over Twitter, he sent this email where you basically had to opt in and say, if I want to stay at Twitter, I'm going to be hardcore and work around the clock and buy into the culture change. And in this case, Elon Musk is trying to essentially wage a hostile takeover of the U.S. government, getting into every agency, looking at the payment systems, the personnel files, going into places like the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, where a lot of the climate data is, to the FAA. And so there's kind of this move fast and break things, sort of tech disruptive vibe that he's trying to bring to all of this. And the risk is that he's going to cut into the bone of government. And then it's one thing to kind of slash staff at Twitter. You can always hire people back. It's another to end up shedding all these essential workers who have decades of, combined millennia of experience, that your institutional memory that you're basically throwing away at a time when there's so many crises in the world.
Rhonda, I think people have this idea of a federal worker being like someone pushing papers around a sort of a generic office building, maybe marble, maybe brutalist architecture style here in Washington, D.C. But we're talking about everyone from doctors and nurses at the Department of Veterans Affairs to people who work in agriculture in rural parts of the country. First, tell us how this buyout offer is being described and sort of what's so confusing or complicated about it. And then we'll talk about who got it.
Right. It's now being summarized as a deferred resignation. So anyone to accept it, they are told that they will be paid through September. But there's a lot of confusion. There's confusion with a lot of people who work in agencies where they're getting emails internally saying, if you don't accept it, we might have layoffs. They're also getting that pressure from outside with Musk and his surrogates. A lot of federal workers just are confused. They're just flat out confused. They don't know what to do. I had an interview with the union leader of the nation's longest serving union for federal workers. And he said the confusion was real a week ago when this fork in the road email came out. But right now people are feeling defiant. They're saying this doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound legal. And we might, stick through. And you mentioned that there are over 2 million federal workers, and they are across the country in all 50 states, also U.S. territories as well. And a lot of people, as you were saying, think that, they're concentrated in D.C. There are other states that have high numbers of federal workers: California, Texas, Pennsylvania, Georgia. I looked at the latest numbers. So this is affecting a lot of people across the country in terms of just being confused about what to do by 11:59 today. Thursday is when people need to make the decision and what comes after it. The other layer of this is James laid it out well, that this feels very Twitter takeover-esque, but the federal government obviously has other rules and regulations. One of those things is going through Congress. This has not been authorized by Congress. Unions usually have rules on buyout language and offers that go to federal workers that Musk and his aides did not abide by. So there is a concern about how legal this is.
And where would the money come from? Like, they're offering to pay people for not working through September. But
Yeah.
we don't even know about government funding, Rhonda.
That's the other layer of
after
this.
a month from now?
Right. So right now, as we speak, Congress is working out a budget deal, and the government needs to be funded beyond March. Right now, the deadline is in March. So because they're in these negotiations, no one really knows where the appropriation for federal workers, payrolls, how that will land. So basically, this is telling people we will pay you through September, although the budget isn't ready. The budget isn't baked yet.
And hanging over all of this is the threat, implicit and explicit, that if you don't take this buyout, you may get laid off later, and so you may end up working a few more months and still get fired. They've basically said if not enough people take this buyout, we're going to have to get rid of people. Of course, that runs into its own legal problems. But if you're a worker facing this fork in the road, that is weighing on you right now.
So our colleague Jeff Stein here at the Washington Post shared this reporting that a federal worker sent him audio of a call that HR did today with federal staff, about the deferred resignation agreements offered by DOGE. And here's what the audio says. The employee says, "Let's say I accept the agreement tomorrow. You were to rescind the agreement and they were to stop paying me on Friday. We would have no recourse available?" The HR official says, "Yes, as the agreement is outlined, that is absolutely correct." There's not really a guarantee that you're actually going to get paid. Like the parameters of this it seems like are sort of flexible and loose. And Rhonda, you also mentioned that there's outside pressure being put on them. I mean, Musk has also been like mocking federal workers, criticizing them. So they're under this sort of public pressure or scapegoating right now that's also uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's true. And that's why, right now we're not seeing a lot of interviews with federal workers, is because they are concerned if they speak out. I know the union leader I spoke to said the emails that they're getting, they have a mean-spirited tone to them, and federal workers just feel like they are targeted. And we have to remember, these are people who often have career specialties. They have that institutional wisdom that they bring to their jobs. And right now they're feeling like there isn't a place for them, or there's confusion, or there is an unknown future with their jobs and their profession.
So you've reported on how some of the people that the union represents worry this is like a trap. Play that out for me a little bit, and then also what are the union leaders saying about the dangers of kind of taking the blunt hammer to buyouts or resignations rather than a targeted approach?
Yeah, so the union leaders are saying that they were telling members not to take this deal because they feel it is illegal. They feel like it can be tested in the courts. It is kind of going through courts right now, so we'll see if there are some judges that make decisions before this deadline. But the reason they feel it's illegal is what I mentioned before. The government is not fully funded through September yet. They are in the midst of budget negotiations, so guaranteeing money to people right now, millions of people, is something that's concerning to these union leaders. And they said, the one I talked to said he spoke to their lawyers. Everyone's saying this is not a good deal. The other part of it, too, is that it is unprecedented because it is so widespread. It is not Musk or Trump saying, we're going to try to whittle things down to 10% of federal workers we want to, reconsider their jobs or leave.
Or
This
even
is
we've done an
widespread.
analysis and we've determined that this
Right.
department is bloated.
Exactly. This is across the board. And you mentioned VA, other organizations, air traffic controllers. You think of people who work at in our intelligence community. I mean, it's so widespread. That's the other thing that is concerning to a lot of people.
What are the real world implications for people who don't work for the federal government?
Well, if you have a lot of federal workers leaving, specifically in certain industries or areas, that could affect you. That is one of the things that the union leader told me is you can take, the headlines that we've all been talking about for the last few weeks with the wildfires or the crash that happened here over the Potomac. Those are things that you can trace back to federal workers and why they're important. So I spoke to Randy Irwin. He is the president of the National Federation of Federal Employees. It's a longstanding union for federal workers. And he told me if you look at some of the headlines that have happened in the last few weeks, whether it's the wildfires in LA or the crash that happened over the Potomac, you can trace that back to federal workers working for the American people.
Like the NTSB has federal workers that are
Exactly.
investigating the crash. They have air traffic controllers.
Yeah,
and they
so
have
this does
firefighters.
come
Yeah.
home to most Americans if you look at, all the areas federal workers work in. So we can listen to what he had to say.
You saw what happened in Los Angeles just a couple weeks ago. If that resignation had gone out and half the wildland firefighters had just resigned and were no longer available, that disaster could have been several times as bad as it was. We saw the plane crash, not enough air traffic controllers in the tower, and that could have been what led to the problem. If we lose half our air traffic controllers, we lose the ability to travel in this country. So by them offering that to everybody, one thing if you took 10%, or something like that, but to do it to everybody, it just shows that they do not understand or care.
James, what are the real world implications that you're watching?
The stuff that isn't that obvious, the stuff that, we haven't talked about, like the purge of the FBI that's underway, and there's a lot of fighting over the names of January 6th agents.
Tell us more about that.
So they, in DC, for example, the head of the Washington field office was forced out. This is a non-political career FBI person. They got rid of him because they're angry about the January 6th prosecutions, the Trump people. But like FBI agents have been embedding and working closely with DC police on a violent crime suppression task force, which actually has helped reduce crime over the last year after it got pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden, these FBI officials are gone. So you're going to,
yes,
I
let me
think
just
that's
understand.
harder to connect.
There's a search within the FBI to find the people who did January 6th related investigations, perhaps led the investigations or even just worked on the investigations of people who were ultimately convicted in courts of criminal offenses related to the attack on the Capitol. Those people have now gone on to work on different things. They work in different task forces, but they're being targeted, and there's a concern that the work they're doing will just end?
Yeah, and you talk about institutional memory and experience. You can't just go hire an FBI agent off the street. It takes years of training. A lot of them have real specializations in fighting, cybercrime or terrorism or domestic violent extremism, and you don't get to choose as an FBI agent what cases you work on. Mm-hmm. So these people didn't say, like, I want to go after the January 6th rioters. They had to, follow their instructions, and now they could end up losing their jobs as a result.
But there's been a pushback within the FBI to try to protect them.
The acting director, this guy James Driscoll, he has pushed back and said, we'll give a list with employee numbers, but we're not going to give you the names. And there are a lot of people who haven't filled out the questionnaire that they were all required to fill out by Monday afternoon that, basically answered questions about their role on any particular January 6th cases. But ultimately, Kash Patel hasn't been confirmed as FBI director, but Pam Bondi did get sworn in on Wednesday as the new attorney general, and she has moved very swiftly to try to bring the FBI to heel and to force them to comply with the president's directive to end so-called weaponization of government, which really is putting these FBI rank and file non-political agents in the hot seat.
Let's talk about the CIA and some controversy there and outrage over the security and cybersecurity, basic 101 cybersecurity of keeping the CIA protected.
Totally. So the CIA, all the employees got this fork of the road buyout email. We were able to confirm that. But what you're talking about, which is actually
just pause on that because that is pretty also astounding in and of itself.
Yeah, and their resignations need to be accepted. But it's a dramatic thing. And one of the things that's happened is all these random 20-something guys who've sort of come in with Elon Musk, gotten provisional security clearances, by all indications haven't gone through traditional background check processes. They've been given access to all this information. Like we talked a little bit on Tuesday, the Treasury Department's payments database, that includes payments for the most classified programs, payments to human sources, people that were running overseas. At the CIA, the DOGE folks asked for a list of everyone who's joined the agency in the last 2 years. The CIA has a 4-year probationary period. So it's really easy to fire anyone who's been there fewer than 4 years. The idea is, like, if you're not a good fit, they want to be able to push you out. Sort of understandable. But so they want all the people who've been there 2 years or less, and they want information about their backgrounds. And so what the CIA did was they sent along a list, and it's first names, last initials, and some other basic information. But this there's relatively few places the CIA recruits from. They had a very diverse class, which is sort of what the Trump people appear to be going after. It could totally expose these people if this list got out, and there's a lot of concern that the safety precautions may not be in place. So this is just one of those little things that's happening, but that could be incredibly damaging to national security if the information falls into the wrong hands and it's being handled by people who aren't trained on this kind of thing.
These young men that Elon Musk has brought along with him to sort of embed in the federal government, they're really everywhere. And I'm not saying that in an exaggerated sense. They're in every department. And they're looking through the files, they're looking through the documentation.
We know from our post reporting that they're putting tons of stuff into AI. They're using a Microsoft AI tool, and they're everything from like employee expense reports to performance reviews. And they're using AI to try to figure out who they can get rid of or what they can cut. But these are all people who have never worked inside the government. So they've made stupid mistakes already because they're moving so quickly. They suspended a bunch of people at the education department, for example, because they had gone to a DEI training. They weren't even DEI like trainers. They just had, it came up in the file. There was like DEI connected to their name. And so they said, oh, these people worked on DEI and got rid of them. But it was a mandatory training at the Department of Education. And so that's just one illustration of you have like 100 people who are still on basically suspended, have been furloughed for something that they didn't do. And it's just an example of how kind of reckless and sloppy a lot of this DOGE work is, because it's happening so fast and with people who really don't know what they're doing.
Rhonda, what else are you watching?
Well, I'm looking at the numbers. Once this deadline is over, and if the administration is transparent about how many people took the buyout offer, it'll be interesting to see. One of the things that the union leader told me is that the numbers that we're getting right now from the administration, and they are from anonymous sources who say they aren't authorized yet to speak on the numbers, but it has gone from 20,000 to 40,000 federal workers who say they will accept the buyout offer. So if you look at that, that's between 1% to 5% of the entire the federal workforce. That is not a lot. So the union leader told me he's hoping that it stays that low, but he is worried that it has already caused a chilling effect. Because as James laid out, I mean, if you're having 20-year-olds who don't understand the inside workings of government, if they're doing investigations and they don't even know what to look for, that's not exactly the best recruitment poster for being a federal worker. So he said he's already concerned that the damage has been done and it will take decades to undo it and try to recruit people into the federal workforce.
And Rhonda and James, we have breaking news reported by our colleague Olivia George. A federal judge in Massachusetts has paused the buyout program's deadline, which had been set for just before midnight Thursday night. This is a temporary pause. A hearing is now set for Monday, James.
So a couple more days for federal workers to consider what to do. More stress and anxiety for these folks we've been talking about.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll keep paying attention to that. Coming up, we're going to talk about USAID. Workers there have already been furloughed or fired. We'll talk with one of our colleagues who's been speaking with people who work in the aid community, both here domestically and overseas. And we'll get a sense of just what the impact is already. Stay with us. This is Sidebar from The Washington Post. A reminder, you can watch us on YouTube. Just look for The Washington Post. Welcome to the table, Anna Roy, video journalist. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. So, on Trump's very first day in office, he signed an executive order halting foreign aid, something he had pledged to do on the campaign trail. That has had a dramatic effect on USAID and its mission, and the workers who either work for it or are contractors working for it. What have you been hearing about the impact?
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, I've been having these conversations all week, and it's painful as people are getting notice to stop working, that they're furloughed, or even they don't know what their status is. But I want to zoom in on a rally that I covered yesterday, because it really put on display both the points that are being made, but then also the coalition of people that's furious and wants to take this public. I spoke with people who are furloughed, who were willing to speak on the record, but furloughed or worse, I should say.
Furloughed or fired.
Right. But then I also spoke with people who, are unsure of their job status or just worried to speak out in general because both their own job security, but then also, frankly, retribution potentially. They're worried about their organization protecting the work that they do on the ground. In terms of what the warning is from people I'm speaking with, they are speaking in life or death terms. Obviously, we know that food essential items are held up in ports. By the way, this is stuff that U.S. taxpayers have already paid for. Congress has already signed off on. The funding ship has sailed, and now this stuff is sitting, potentially expiring, unable to be actually administered or transported to the people who are relying on it.
How extensive is the mission that we're talking about? Who are the people that are actually aided and helped?
It is extensive. We're talking about food. We're talking about clean water. We're talking about medical services for people like moms and babies who need life-saving care. We're also talking about things like HIV, and there's concerns about potential outbreaks, in the absence of medicine and assistance. I spoke with one woman named Carol Adum, who is a retired USAID employee. She was a Peace Corps volunteer. She's worked on the ground in Africa. And from her personal experience, she spoke about what this freeze means in terms of people's real lives.
HIV/AIDS certainly is huge because without the retrovirals being given, people will die very quickly. New babies will be born that are infected. It's just going to happen very quickly. But it's also not just about HIV/AIDS, it's also about just basic food and clean water.
So Marco Rubio is now the acting head of USAID, something that Donald Trump did. He's the head of the State Department, Secretary of State. They have said that there'll be waivers, humanitarian waivers. So there could be exceptions to getting the aid through. But it has been really chaotic, Anna.
Right. So there are exceptions, as Rubio has emphasized, particularly for organizations whose work is life-saving humanitarian assistance. They can fill out a waiver to apply to be able to temporarily resume their work in this review period. But yeah, as you're alluding to, the parameters have been very confusing. And even beyond that, the furloughs are ongoing. So to fill this out, you need staff, resources, intel that a lot of these organizations are actively losing as we speak. And then even beyond that, I spoke with someone yesterday who said, these are very complex supply chains. And, resuming is not as simple as just turning a spigot back on.
And if people are furloughed and fired, they can't even really move forward. I heard from one source who works for an international aid organization that they have estimated that if these health commodities aren't delivered on schedule in the next 90 days, it could lead to as many as 566,000 deaths from HIV/AIDS, malaria, unmet health needs, including 215,000 pediatric deaths. So, James, where does this process go from here?
Marco Rubio is trying to reassure people, conservative senators on Capitol Hill, who've seen a lot of these programs save so many lives. One of the great triumphs of the George W. Bush administration was PEPFAR in Africa. Rubio, behind closed doors at the State Department, was trying to be really reassuring yesterday, saying, we're going to get this sorted out. Foreign aid isn't over. I get it. We're working on it. Almost simultaneously, Vice President J.D. Vance was speaking at a conference and was boasting about scaling back foreign aid, and even said that one of the reasons they wanted to scale it back is because it was promoting atheism, when in fact the biggest recipient of USAID money is actually Catholic Relief Services. So it's not even true, but it gets at the mixed messaging from the administration and really the ongoing chaos that we're seeing.
So this is less than 1% of the federal budget, but it does adhere to what Donald Trump has promised to do, which is cut off the federal aid funding. So there's that question about promises offered and then promises fulfilled. Republican response at all, Rhonda?
I think you're seeing publicly that they are saying they are standing by the president, that they believe we should be tightening the belt when it comes to giving aid across seas. But I think this is such a developing story that we will start seeing ramifications of it that maybe were things people did not anticipate. And Republican lawmakers will likely have to answer to those things, especially when there are things that they hear from the constituent level, their concerns. I think it's something that's really concerning a lot of people across the country. I know yesterday there was a coordinated protest about pretty much everything that has happened in the last 2 weeks. It was a campaign that I believe was called 50-51, standing for 50 states, 50 protests. And people all over at state capitals were discussing how they are concerned, specifically about Elon Musk and his influence over the president, saying that, they didn't vote for him, no one did. And I think people are kind of waking up. It may take a while, but I think Republicans will hear from constituents as things move forward and become a little clearer.
And Anna, you heard some of that anti-Musk sentiment at the rally that you attended near the Capitol yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of signage that we've been seeing, including in Trump's first term, but there was chanting, against Elon Musk, and he was really a main character at this protest. People are angry, and a sentiment that I have heard from people over the course of the last week is that they're fine with a review. They're fine with an audit. This has not been a review or an audit that has, been able to not come in the way of all of the work that they do. It's been incredibly disruptive, maximally disruptive. And so what they're concerned about is what could be next.
Anna Listroy, thank you so much. James Hohmann, Rhonda Colvin. Really appreciate hearing from all of you. I'm Libby Casey. We'll be back next week with more from Sidebar from the Washington Post. Thank you.